I maintain that no matter what race you are, you cannot grow up in America and not have racial bias.
Hey everyone, the episode that you are listening to or watching right now is actually pre recorded. And I just wanted to jump on here to introduce myself to some people who may be actually tuning into the podcast or watching for the very first time. My name is Jimmie Johnson. I host the show. And a little bit about the Stay the Course podcast. It's a show where we get to meet some of the most influential thought leaders around the globe and hear their stories. My hope is that you are inspired, uplifted, and motivated to fulfill your purpose and make a difference on this earth. Well, hey, in the current time that we're living in right now, we're having lots of conversations about race and police injustice. And today, we're going to have a conversation that's going to help us with racial reconciliation. I'm sitting down with Dr. Richard C. Harris. He's a professor, he's an author, he's a speaker, and a former member and leader of the Ku Klux Klan. And you may be asking, well, Jimmie, why are you talking with a leader who formerly was affiliated with a hate group? Well, I believe Dr. Harris's story will help all of us understand some of the racial bias that we all have, and also how we can look inside of ourselves and the systems that we work, the institutions that are built and we function in every single day to realize how we can make a difference and a change. So without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode of the Stay in the Course podcast. Dr. Harris, set the scene for us. Take us to Kokomo, Indiana, where you were born and raised. I want to learn more about your upbringing.
Certainly, I was born and reared in a pretty much all white environment. I grew up in an elementary school, went to an elementary school that was completely segregated from grades 1 through 5. And I lived in this all white world. But there were kids on the playground and they liked to bully, and I was the kid that was bullied. I was the one that was picked on. I was the little scrawny, skinny runt. I know you can't tell it by looking at me now, but I was that kid they took the lunch money away from. And so I grew up angry. I was very angry. I vowed that someday I was going to have power. I didn't know how, but I was going to have power, and I was going to get even with uh, everybody that picked on me, everyone that ever did anything to me. Well, I went through elementary school, and one reason our school stayed as segregated as it was because my father, who was a businessman, very respected businessman in town, very successful, but he also was a segregationist. Now he was not a member of the Ku Klux Klan or anything like that, but he believed in keeping the schools segregated, and so he was the one that would sue the school board every year and fight desegregation. Well, that fight went on every single year until finally between my fifth grade and sixth grade. So I'm moving out of the elementary end of the building into the middle school. Uh, that's when he lost, and the school was desegregated. So now my formerly all white world had just gotten African American students coming into it. Not a lot, maybe 5% of the school, maybe 10% at the most.
And this was your
But
first opportunity to get to interact with African Americans?
this was actually the first time. I know it's hard for anyone to believe in this day and age. This was the first time I had ever probably even been in the same vicinity or the same room and actually spoken to a person of color,
Wow.
at least another child of color. Yeah. And so I looked at this as an opportunity. Maybe, hey, maybe this is the opportunity. Maybe I can be the bully because this is kind of my turf. I've been here 5 years. I know this place. And I started picking on the African American kids that were being bussed in from the other end of town. And I started calling them names and taunting them and jeering them, and so much so that by my eighth grade yearbook, I still have it. It actually says to Richard, Grand Dragon of the Klan, keep those inward in line. I had
Mm.
built a reputation as a racist because people had heard me talk.
Yeah. And so, at that point, you've become the bully since, because you hear this phrase, hurt people hurt people. So now you're the hurt person who's now hurting African Americans. And so, how does that lead you to becoming a member of the Klan?
Well, what I did not know was at least one of those middle school teachers was a secret active member of the Ku Klux Klan. And he or she, I don't even know to this day exactly who it was, but one of them, they were listening to me and they were taking note.
And you
The
said he
Klan
or
was
she,
actually watching me.
and you said
He
he or
or
she.
she.
So there are
Yeah.
female members in the Klan.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
Yes. Uh, we had, when I ran the Klan in Indiana, in my own county, our county clans, my county had so many women that we actually formed a women's group. So they actually had their own meetings, their own leaders, their own groups because it was just too. It just got too big, and so we decided to separate the men from the women. So yeah, there are plenty of women in the Ku Klux Klan, guarantee you. So this teacher was listening to what I was saying, and they were reporting back to Klan headquarters saying, "Hey, we better keep an eye on this Richard Harris kid because he might be very useful to us one of the days, sometime in the future." And so they were actually watching me, and I didn't even know it. And so then when I became 16, which was the age that you could become a full adult member of the Klan just suddenly kind of appeared in my life. I had no idea at that point that they had been watching me literally for about 5 years.
And there's, stages to the Klan. You could be an adult in the Klan, but you also, I believe, you can also be a kid, right?
Right. There's a junior Klan. We like to call them the kids Klan. But yeah, there was a junior Klan. You weren't privy, of course, to all the secrets or anything. And most of the people in the junior Klan were simply or children of members of the Klan. But we actually did do recruiting in the elementary schools and middle schools to get kids indoctrinated early, so that when they were 16, then they were just ready to move right on in and become a full-fledged member of the Klan.
And this is what people are referring to when we say America was built around systemic racism. Would you agree that the Klan played a factor into why we're still seeing this racial divisiveness in our country?
Well, obviously, it started long before the Klan ever came into existence, but the
Absolutely.
Klan has definitely helped perpetuate it since the Civil War. And so yes, systemic racism is a real thing. I'm watching in amazement as many white people are hearing these words for the first time in recent weeks, and
Mhm.
they're actually some of them are actually beginning to say, hey, there might really be something to this. But yes, it's a very well it's alive and well, and it's very much a real thing.
Yeah. And so here you are, 18, and then you become a leader in this organization. How did that become?
Well, I joined the Klan when I was 16. They were looking to they were looking to groom me immediately for some kind of leadership because I was articulate, I was bright, I was a good student, I could carry myself well, and I was a good public speaker. I could get up in front of people and talk, and I could hold the attention of the audience. So that made for the possibility of leadership. So they started grooming me for leadership right off the bat. By the time I was 18, uh, I was made the second youngest Grand Dragon in the U.S. Klan. I became Dragon at age 18. David Dukes was kind of my role model down in Louisiana. He's a few years older than me, but
My
he
home
became
state.
Dragon at age 17. And so, of course, David, educated, articulate, clean cut looking, that's what they saw in me. And they said, this, Richard Harris can be our David Dukes, only up here in Indiana.
And so you're in the leadership position. What was that like?
Well, it's not a lot like what a lot of people imagine. Uh, being the Grand Dragon means that you're in a lot of meetings, and they're not you're planning rallies, you're writing a lot of speeches, you're planning being a spokesperson, and you're also writing a lot of propaganda materials. That was what I spent more time doing, was kind of being the spokesperson for the organization, and how can I get more recruitment materials out, and writing that kind of thing. Uh, a lot of people think that they are directing the violence, and they may have been back in the 1960s, but this was the 1970s. A lot of my advisors were people who had just gotten out of jail, they'd been spent so much time in jail for different things. They weren't looking at that. They really weren't looking for that. They were looking for how can we keep our leaders out of jail, and the only way to do that is to keep them pretty much in the dark. So I spent very little time actually plotting out those kinds of things. There were plenty of people in the Klan to do that. My job was to be the spokesperson and to persuade people to join. That was our big thing, was recruitment.
Did you do anything that was criminal back then that you probably would never want to acknowledge or?
Well, people always ask me, uh, did you kill anybody in the Klan? Me personally, did I kill anyone in the Klan? No, I tried, but I wasn't a very good shot. So there were a couple times when I shot at people, but I wasn't that great of a shot. So I was involved in some shootouts, but I was never supposed to be involved in those, because I was being groomed for leadership. So did I do anything illegal? I'm sure I did. I'm sure I did. I'm sure that I was. Uh, I'm sure that things were done that was illegal, but they were very careful to try to keep a lot of even the information about things away from me, so that I couldn't be brought up on arrested for conspiracy charges.
Yeah,
They
that would
they
have been
were
my
very
next
concerned about
question. Do you think you should be facing any charges for anything that you were responsible for back then?
I don't really think so. Uh, Simply because they did do such a good job of keeping me away from that. I really didn't know much of anything that was going on, even though I was running the Klan, because I was just involved in writing the propaganda, that kind of thing. And no one believes that, but that's really the way they were operating then, because they had learned the lessons of the 1960s, when some of their big leaders ended up getting convicted of things. And so they purposely kept me in the dark, and that was very frustrating to me, because I knew, I could sense that things were going on that I didn't know anything about, and they wouldn't even tell me about.
So here you are, you're part of this well run machine that it is, and something that's still being well run today. Um,
Yes.
how do you get through the process of, hey, I'm this big guy in charge, I'm in leadership, I'm a part of the Klan, I was bullied, now I'm bullying other people. Now you want out, you want something different. How do you make that transition?
Okay. Well, what got me to that point was, after being in for about 4 years, I was living a life of just hate. I mean, that was my life, was to think up more things to write, and to write speeches, and to give those speeches, and to make these appearances, and just I was just throwing out hate all the time, and that can wear you down, and it was wearing me down. I was also, I think I was maturing a little bit during that time, because I was recognizing, hey, I've really ruined my life. I mean, this is my life now. I will never be a normal person. I can't just walk away from this. And so by the time I was 20 years old, uh, I I was getting a little bit tired of it. But then all of a sudden, I got word that one of my four armed bodyguards, my security guards, had put a hit out on me, and
Hmm.
he was going to have me assassinated.
That'll certainly
So that
get your
then,
attention.
yeah, so he could rise up in the ranks, because there would be like a domino effect. It would, if someone would have to be dragging, and that would empty up another position of leadership, and so eventually he might get a position of leadership, he thought. So I was running scared. I'd already been crying myself to sleep every night, and realizing that I had just pretty much destroyed my life. I wanted out, but there was no way out. I decided I would call the Imperial Wizard, the head of the nation, and I would ask him for a national office. That would give me better security, different security, more security. So that seemed to be a reasonable plan. So I called him. He said the only national office he had that he was looking to fill in the near future was that of the national chaplain of the Klan. And it shocks a lot of people, but the Klan actually believes that they are the true Christians,
Hmm.
and they have chaplains. And every Klan meetings are started with scripture reading and prayer, and maybe even a Klan chaplain giving a sermon. We did that all the time. So uh, I said, "Well, I don't know anything about being a chaplain." And he said, "Just start reading the Bible for yourself, and start getting some good sounding scripture verses, put them in your speeches, start sounding religious, and I'll take care of everything else. You're going to be the national chaplain of the Klan." That sounded reasonable to me. I could do that. So that night I went home. I started, found the Bible, dusted it off, and said, "Okay, I'm going to have to start reading this." I didn't know where to read. I know that now, that God was guiding me, because I didn't know one book from the other. I turned to the Gospel according to John, and I started reading John. And I was excited right at the beginning. I was saying, "Oh, this is great. These are the stories of Jesus. I found the stories of Jesus. I'll just quote Jesus. You can't sound more religious than quoting Jesus. This will be perfect. This is going
Right.
to be a piece of cake." Started reading John, got to John chapter 4, and that's when the light bulb went on. John chapter 4 is the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. It's one of the Klan's favorite stories.
Hmm.
The Klan chaplains would preach from this. I'd heard many sermons on this, and they were all pretty much the same. Samaritan, they did teach me that correctly. One of the few things they taught me correctly was Samaritan was half Jewish, half Gentile, or as they would call it, a race mixer or a half breed. And that's what they would teach. And there's nothing the Klan hates worse than race mixing. So they would read through the story. Jesus asks the Samaritan woman at the well for a drink. She says, "Why are you asking me for a drink? You are a Jew and I am a Samaritan." And then the Bible says, "For Jews don't have anything to do with Samaritans." And the Klan chaplains would literally close the Bible. That was the end of the story reading, and they would start to preach. Jews don't have anything to do with Samaritans, race mixers, half breeds. Well, surely we're smarter than Jews.
But if you
Jesus
are a believer of
hates
Christ, you would know that's not the
race
complete
mixers.
story.
If you're a real believer in Christ, yes, you should know that Jesus does not hate race mixers, half breeds, Samaritans. But we didn't have our Bibles with us at Klan meetings. So if that was the end of the story, we figured that was the end of the story. The only thing is, I'm reading it for the first time for myself.
So you began to
And
see
so
the real story.
yeah, so I'm reading down, and I say, "Oh, yeah, I know this story. I know this all about Samaritans. I know about this." And I'm reading down. And then I realized for the first time, there's more to that story than what they ever told us. And I find out that this Samaritan woman becomes a believer in Jesus. Jesus accepts her. She goes back to her town. She brings out a whole bunch more Samaritans. They become believers. Jesus accepts them. The real meaning of the Samaritan woman at the well story is Jesus loves Samaritans. And that's when the light bulb went on for me. The Klan has lied to me. How can they be the true Christians if they are twisting the scriptures so obviously? And so I stayed awake that night. I read the entire Gospel of John, kept finding place after place where I could tell they had misquoted, misinterpreted the scriptures. I didn't know how to pray, but I said something like this to God. I said, God, uh, if you can get me out of this alive, I want out, and I want to find out what a real Christian is, and I want to be one. And that was my prayer. I
Wow.
quit the Klan the next day.
Couldn't have been that easy
Now,
to get out, though, right?
it was not easy to get out, but I told them, and they became convinced that I was serious about quitting because I wanted to find out what a real Christian was. I went to I went to church. I couldn't just go walking around town without security. I may have said I quit the Klan, but the rest of the world, they didn't know I quit the Klan. I was still the Grand Dragon as far as anyone else was concerned. So I took 2 security guards with me to church. By the end of that day, both of those security guards had quit the Klan with me. And so in a weekend, basically, they had lost a Grand Dragon and 2 security guards. I was a popular Grand Dragon. They were beginning to wonder, how many more is he going to take with him? So they said, look, we're going to let you out and we're going to let you live if, and with a gun to my head, they said, if you keep quiet, keep your mouth shut, we'll let you live.
Well, now you're
That
speaking
was,
out about it. So how long did you keep quiet?
I kept quiet for 13 years. I went on, I felt called into the ministry. I went to college, studied for the ministry. I became a pastor. I kept quiet for 13 years. And if anyone asked me during those 13 years, hey, weren't you in the Klan? I would say yes, and I would talk to them about it and about how God had changed me. But I didn't get on platforms. I didn't publicly, get up and start speaking out and the Klan pretty much left me alone during that time
But you began
because I
speaking
did.
out when? So when did you start
I did.
speaking out about it?
So I was a senior pastor of a church and I was a part time professor at Purdue University. And a African American lady who was about 15 years older than me, she was taking my class, and halfway through, she came up to me and she asked me, she said, Professor Harris, have you ever heard of a man named Dick Haywood? I said, yeah, Dick Haywood. A lot of people have heard of him. He used to run the Klan here. He was the Dragon in Indiana back in the 70s. And she goes, yes. And you're him. I said, yes, I am. That was
Wow.
me.
So she
She said,
called
well,
you out,
why?
man.
She called me out, and I said, yep, that was me. She said, well, why don't you tell people what God has done for you, how he's changed you and transformed your life? And I said, well, 2 reasons. One, no one's ever really asked me. And number 2, I like living. And that was the truth. I had no intentions of actually going out real publicly and saying anything. But then she reached into her bag and she pulled out a flyer that had my picture on it. And it said, former Grand Dragon of the KKK speaks to Purdue University's Student Cultural Society. I said, I'm not doing that. And she said, oh, yes, you are. And I said, that's the Black Student Union. I'm not going to tell the Black Student Union of Purdue, hey, guess what? I was the dragon of the Klan. She said, well, you have to tell them what God has done for you and how he's changed you.
If you would have done that today, they would have called for your resignation immediately, especially in this cancel culture. You know that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They sure would have. But instead, uh, I said, she what she had done was she had put these flyers out during that hour. People had been putting flyers out. She goes, when you walk out of this classroom, you've got your pictures all over this place. You're going to speak to this group and you're going to tell them what God has done for you. So I I did. Again, long story short, it ended up uh, that the Associated Press was there. I had no intent. I didn't even realize reporters were there. And the next day, I'm all over all the newspapers in the whole Midwest. Former Grand Dragon of the Indiana Klan denounces racism and the Klan. And boy, that'll change your life quick.
Yeah. So
So
now, so
now I
now
was out.
you're out and you're sharing your story, and you're basically your crusade to now help with racial reconciliation. So now here you are. Now you're sharing your story to the world, and I've seen a number of interviews with you as well. How have you made that transformation, and what has it been like over the last 30 years or so?
Right. Yeah, it's been about 30 years that I've been out telling people, speaking out. I wrote a book about my whole experience. And so I'm well known now for denouncing the Klan, denouncing racism. Uh, Eventually, my bishop, it got too dangerous for me in Indiana. My bishop transferred me down to West Palm Beach, Florida,
Where I'm located.
where where I ended up co-pastoring a Haitian congregation. So God has a sense of humor,
Yes,
for
he
the
does.
former Grand Dragon of the Klan to be co-pastoring a Haitian congregation. But that was also where I believe even more transformation happened, because I was no longer living in my all white world. Now I was in Hispanic and Haitian uh, island communities. And I didn't even know a lot of white people. I knew far more people of color than I did white people. And so I really began to get rid of some of the more unconscious bias. I believe God really did a major work on me down there. Then I got transferred up to pastor an all white church in Lakeland, Florida.
Hmm.
And this church had been around for 85 years. I looked at it and said, I don't want my children to be raised in an all white world the way I was. I want multiculturalism. I want it to be the way God, I believe, intended for it to be.
Right.
And so I brought in the first black members into that church. I brought in the first Hispanic members into that church, and I tried to create, more of a multicultural church. It's not easy. I'll tell you that right now. It's not easy to transform a church that has been all one race into multicultural. It's not easy. It's not easy. But I stuck with that church for 18 years, and then eventually stepped down as senior pastor. At that point, I was actually um, working full time as a professor at a local university.
Hmm.
So I couldn't keep doing both. And so I'd been there 18 years, decided, okay, I think it's time to step down. I stepped down out of the pulpit, and it was less than a year, about a year or so, before I was invited to join the staff of a historic African American church who had been around for 130 plus years. And the senior pastor asked me to come and join his staff because he believed in the idea of multiculturalism. And I was the first white pastor of on staff in that church, and I'm still there. It's been 5 or 6 years now, and I enjoy my new church family. And it has been a growth process for me. And more than anything, I've been able to experience firsthand not only the forgiveness of God, but I've been able to experience the forgiveness of my black congregation, and the love that they have, and it's a great model for all of our churches for that.
So now here you are. You've been through this entire process. Obviously, people will have questions for you, like, how can you just magically say you went from being a racist to now you consider yourself as a gracist? Here's a viewer question for you. What one person asked: would you, being a former member of a hate group, is there ever temptation to fall back into your old ways?
I can honestly say that I have never been tempted to go back, and I think part of the reason was because I was so frustrated when I found out how much they had lied to me, that I was so angry with them that I just, I wanted nothing to do with them, and I just hoped that they would leave me alone, and I was going to leave them alone. And everyone always asks, well, did you go back and try to convert some of the? No, I was told to stay away if I wanted to live, and I truly believed that they were serious, and so I stayed away from them, and they stayed away from me. They were actually, not antagonistic as long as I kept my mouth shut. But things changed once I started speaking out against that. So no, I really haven't been. I haven't. I have no temptation to go back to that hatred. It is so draining, and instead, a life of love and forgiveness and acceptance is so, uh, I don't know, strengthening to me, as opposed to draining. Yes.
Another question from a viewer is about systemic racism. They say, they would ask if a former member knew other members that were teachers and policemen. And you obviously shared the story of, a teacher of your school being a member of the KKK. But do you believe that, racial bias and the way African Americans are policed in society today has something to do with the systemic racism and ties to groups like the KKK?
Oh, absolutely. There were police officers in the Klan, active in the Klan when I was in the Klan. Not not a lot, not a lot by any stretch of the imagination, and we didn't trust them. We held them even though they were members, we held them kind of at arm's length. We didn't really know whether we could trust them too much, so they didn't get in on a lot of the secrecy. We purposely designed things so that they wouldn't know a lot of stuff. But the problem was not the few members that were actually card carrying full-fledged members of the Klan. The problem was there were a lot of other police officers that we knew were friendly towards our ideas, and they would help us out in a pinch, and we could go to them and we could expect to get treated pretty well, unfairly actually, but we could expect them to treat us very well. And so there were plenty of them, but it's not just police. I always get out It always amazes me when a story comes out that, oh, three firefighters were found out to be members of the Nazis or the Klan or something, and people are just amazed. Oh, they are shocked. And to me, it's like, it's not shocking because there are people in every profession. We had doctors, we had lawyers, we had judges in our back pocket that were either members of the Klan. We had business owners. I mean, everything you could imagine uh, had connections to the Klan. And if they were not actual members of the Klan, they were friends and supporters of the Klan, and we knew who they were.
And I think that's what makes it tough for blacks to just get over this idea that all is well here in America, when we know that this racism still exists and there's still people who are part of the Klan who may actually be in the very systems that we occupy every single day. And
That's very true, and I think that's even more disconcerting. Are not the actual members of the Klan, but it's the pervasiveness
Mhm.
of of racism, of racial bias uh, in our society. And I maintain that no matter what race you are, you cannot grow up in America and not have racial bias. I've seen it even with some of the members of my black congregation. I've heard them say things that I just makes me cringe, and it's like, no, you've bought into stereotypes. You have been, trained by the media. We've been brought up on this. We've seen commercials, we've seen ads, and you're buying into some of this.
What about
And
white
so
privilege?
I guarantee you, white people are buying into it because it's just that's our society, and it needs to change. White privilege is real, but so many white people have trouble understanding white privilege because they look at themselves and say, oh well, I've worked hard for everything I've got, and I'm not all that rich. I'm poor, or I'm just low middle class, so I don't have any privilege. A lot of white privilege is not so much what you have, but it's what you don't have to put up with.
Mm.
I get up in the morning, I don't ever have to worry about, well, am I going to make it to work? If I get pulled over by a cop, am I in danger? I don't worry about that. White people don't need to worry about that. Uh, I don't worry about if I go into a restaurant, well, am I going to get served, or are they going to treat me badly because of the color of my skin? White people don't have to worry about it. White people don't have to have those discussions with their kids about do this, don't do that, do this, look this way, don't do that, be polite, do this. We don't have to tell our kids things like that because they're not in danger of being shot or something like that, by someone. They're not, so that's a lot of what privilege is, and the fact that you can just look at the numbers. If you're white, you have more opportunity to get, the chances are better if you're applying for a job to get called in for an interview. Uh, you can just look at the statistics out there, and it's very clear. The one thing I would say is that in the last month or so, there are probably more white people in this country that are actually waking up and beginning to see that white privilege really does exist. I don't think they know what to do with it, but I think that they are actually beginning to, some of them are actually beginning to say, yeah, there might be something to this systemic racism. Yeah.
I have another viewer question, and this person asks, "What can you do to form a bridge between hurt Black people and racist white people?"
Relationships is what it's going to have to boil down to. And people are most comfortable with people who look like them, think like them, speak like them, uh, have their own, the same lifestyle. We're more comfortable. We've got to get out of our comfort zone. It's time to actually intentionally reach across the racial boundaries and begin to make friends, real friendships, not just acquaintances or being a colleague with someone, but actual real friendships. This is what I understood, that we needed to model this for my own children. Otherwise, would they grow up to be the same as what I grew up to be? We want to model. I purposely set out to model the fact that when we went on family vacation, oftentimes we would go with a black family. Uh, it was normal. The new normal is that when I'm shooting pool in my billiards room in my home, there are Hispanic people, there are Asian people in there with me. These are my friends. This is the new normal, and I purposely wanted them to see that the self segregation that we tend to do was not acceptable.
Yeah, because racism is not so much that it's taught, it's caught. As you mentioned earlier in your conversation with your dad and your parents or whatever, not necessarily saying, hey, we don't talk to black people, but it was implied because that's the way you saw things. Another viewer question that I have, and this will be the last one as we wrap up this interview, is with you being a former leader of a hate group, is there ever temptation for you to fall into old sin? And how do you hold yourself accountable to that?
I don't I don't know. I've experienced so much of God's grace over the last 42 years. Uh, I That's just not a temptation for me. How do I hold myself accountable? Well, for one thing, I uh, I talk about race. Most white people don't talk about race because they don't have to.
And it makes them
They
feel
don't.
uncomfortable.
Yeah, it makes them feel uncomfortable. They don't know what to say, so they just don't ever have to deal with it. And I purposely deal with it because obviously I'm a pastor in a black congregation, so we talk about race. I feel comfortable after talking about these things, and I also feel comfortable saying, I did I if I say this, does that sound is that not right? Is there a better way to say it? I'm a communication professor, so I'm very concerned about how we communicate with each other,
So you
and
have to have that
always looking for
humility and empathy, right?
humility and empathy. Yes, I will never know what it's like to grow up as a person of color in this country. I will never. I cannot ever know that. However, I can try to understand, and I can have empathy as I learn more and as I communicate more and as I build those bridges and get to know people better. I can begin to have a little bit of empathy so that hopefully I can be a better person myself.
Dr. Richard C. Harris, thanks for joining me on the Staying the Course podcast. What are some ways that people can stay connected with you? You know, your website, where people can purchase your book, and social media as well.
Sure. My book is available on Amazon as well as Audible. If you'd like to listen to me read it to you. And so it's called One Nation Under Curse. One Nation Under Curse. And you'll take a deep dive into the inner workings of a white supremacist organization by reading that. And then also, my website is harrisspeaks.com, harrisspeaks.com. And you can find out more about me. Also, something that's coming up. You can connect with me, obviously, contact me through that website. But also, something coming up that I'm working on is one of my colleagues who is we have taught team taught a course at the university on interracial communication, and we're working on putting some aspects of that course into a course online, and you'll be hearing more about that on my website as well.
Dr. Harris, can you leave us with the quote that you live by every single day?
Yes. Years ago, I adopted this as kind of my life quote: "If it is not justice for all, it is not justice at all."
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Dr. Richard C. Harris. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.